Thank you to our repeat attendees for following along, and welcome to those who are joining for the first time. Our goals for today's presentation are to share reflections from the delivery phase of our Montana WIC demonstration project, specifically related to how we define, plan, and execute on various types of testing to ensure we're building the right product that fits user and government partner needs. Next slide. We'll start by briefly sharing context about the demonstration project and how we transitioned from discovery to, which was to understand the problem space and define our approach, to delivery, executing on that approach. We'll talk through details of how we're testing the components of our project, what we've learned from that testing, and what's coming next. We'll wrap up with time for audience Q&A.
I apologize, LP. I have now lost the chat was disabled and I was trying to enable it, and in the process I lost the presentation. So I am going to attempt to enable the chat.
Okay.
Let's see, chat, it looks like Q&A. I think the chat is disabled, so we can't chat in. Oh, that's kind of strange. Okay, I actually don't know. I don't know what's going on with the chat. We'll give it one more moment of troubleshooting, and if not, we will we'll just move forward. Let's see, folks. Folks see the chat. Can you all see us in the chat? I don't know if people are going to be able to say that because they can't chat back. So if you have anything to, any questions or anything you'd like to say, please put it in the Q&A. There's a Q&A option. As a participant, I can see LP's chat and ask questions. We can see chat. Okay, excellent. Great. So chat is back. And now I need to go ahead and find the presentation, and we'll put that back again. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay, let's give this another go.
Awesome. I'll recap the agenda slide, so we'll start here. So welcome again, everybody. We will start our demo today by sharing context about the demonstration project and how we transitioned from discovery, which was to understand our problem space and define our approach, to delivery, executing on that approach. We'll then talk through details of how we're testing the components of our project, what we've learned from that testing, and what's coming next. We'll wrap up with time for audience Q&A. So let's get going. Next slide, please. We can start by zooming out for a second. Next slide, please. Our research on the WIC technology landscape helped to define our vision for technology to enable WIC to build tools that are interoperable, speaking to each other and sharing data via technology called application programming interfaces, or APIs, that are governed by an API standard. APIs are software that can connect disparate technology tools and systems to share data. For example, an API could be built to connect a standalone scheduling tool into an MIS system, so that data from the scheduling tool is accessible to staff in the MIS. This model, coupled with other modern software development practices like human-centered design, can ensure that new tools meet the needs of all users and promote participant choice without compromising operational efficiency. So many of you might have heard me share this before, but there are currently some APIs in use in some state programs to connect data between technology tools. However, they are built to connect to specific tools and specific MIS. API use is not pervasive or equitable across the WIC program. So that's where this vision for an API standard comes into play. And an API standard across MIS systems would open the program to innovation without needing to make direct changes to an MIS and risk other consortium members with changes. So we set out to define a demonstration project around specifically the certification and enrollment steps in WIC that could learn towards this vision. How might we prototype an API integration and build evidence for the value of an API standard? Next slide, please. So during our 6-month demonstration project, we partnered with Montana and set out to first build an eligibility screener / referral tool and an API prototype to improve participant experience with WIC and reduce barriers for referral partners. We wanted to learn towards this API standard vision by collecting evidence, quantitative and qualitative, for the value of API integrations. We wanted to measure burden reduction for participants and/or staff. And finally, our last goal is to contribute to WIC technology systems change by sharing learnings from the demonstration project in demo days like today. At our project kickoff in April, here is where we started. Here is what we thought the components of this project would look like. On the left-hand side, you can see that we didn't know much yet about what the eligibility screener would look like, but we knew there would at least be a start page, some questions to share eligibility information, and then a way to submit that data. We knew there would be an API to facilitate the data transfer from the eligibility screener to Montana's MIS system, but we didn't know exactly how that would be done or how we could prototype that API integration. And finally, we knew WIC staff would have to see this eligibility data, eligibility information, but didn't yet know what that would look like. We would find out during discovery. Here's another view of what we knew at the start of the project, a draft architecture diagram for the mock API. We started by assuming the prototype tool or eligibility screener would only interface with the mock API instead of directly interfacing with Montana's MIS. At this point, we didn't know what kind of existing API or import-export functionality Montana's MIS would support. The idea was to mock out what an API could accomplish if it were built into the MIS. So this mock API's intention is to pretend that it is MIS, simulating the experience of if the MIS had the API, the prototype tool could talk to directly. I'll now hand it to Daniela to briefly touch on our transition from discovery to delivery, and then dive into the bulk of the presentation about testing.
Thanks, LP. Yeah, so we are talking today about our transition from discovery to delivery. Next slide. In our last public demo day in July, we've had office hours since then, but this was our last big demo day. It was really a reflection on our entire discovery phase. So if you're able to make it to our last demo day, great. But if you weren't, you can watch that presentation on the Nava website. If you're interested, we go over a lot of the initial research that we did, talk about concept testing and all of our initial technical research as well. We're building on that in today's presentation, but not a necessary prerequisite. Next slide. And then just placing us kind of in our overall timeline of this project, we're about 5-ish months from our initial kickoff back in April. We have about 7 weeks left in our overall project. So just looking here, you can see we're really focused on finishing out delivery and then transitioning into that handoff phase for the rest of our project. And so delivery, what do we talk about here? It's really about going through the iterative and evaluative design processes. So the design work that we're focused on during these phases is really around prototyping, usability, testing those prototypes, building our understanding of how we would need to iterate on the design in order to improve the experience. So we're validating our designs across the service as well, not just with those end users who are here with participants, but also with stakeholders and staff members. And all of those insights are going to help us launch something that we feel meets user and business needs, and also help us define metrics that will help us measure success and performance as we get closer to the end here. And today we're specifically focusing on talking about testing. So the first part of this, we're going to be talking about testing the eligibility screener prototype and usability testing. And then later we'll touch on some technical testing that's been basically the bulk of what we've been doing during delivery. I'm really excited to dive deeper now. So just starting off here with some definitions, what is a prototype? When we last presented in the Discovery Reflection Demo Day, we ended the design portion of the presentation talking about concept testing. And in delivery, we were able to refine that concept into high fidelity wireframes and build out an interactive prototype. A prototype is a model or a sample of a product idea that allows you to test that concept and then validate the design direction with users. And prototypes can be made a number of ways, and they can exist as many different things. But for our usability testing, we designed high fidelity wireframes of all of the screens in the eligibility screener using the United States Web Design System components. We linked together all of those screens in a primary flow that we wanted to test and made those into a clickable prototype. And then we also built out interactive components like drop downs and states on radio buttons and checkboxes. And that was in order to try and replicate more complex interactions so that this prototype would feel realish when users were going through the experience. And as this scrolls through on the right, you can see that there's a lot of placeholder data in there. It's not perfect. It's not an actual replication of what this product would look like in real life, but it is close enough to allow us to have a productive conversation with users about what they're experiencing during usability testing. And this seems like a lot of work. We built out this high fidelity prototype. We linked all these screens. We built out the interactions. And then we go through the process of preparing and planning usability testing for something that's not real. But why are we doing this? It's really to validate that design direction. It's just a lot easier, even though I just, that sounds like a lot of work, it's still a lot easier to build a prototype than to actually build out that real product. We're using the design software Figma. That's just design software. It's not actually code. It's really easy to mock up something that we can test to make sure that we're meeting user needs before we actually get to building it out. It's cheaper to change interactions or content now. We have a lot of time doing this to adjust based on what users actually experience. And then it also helps us define how this step or process may fit into staff workflows. We can show this, we can get feedback, and we can understand better what we'll need to do to support them, and to also make sure that this doesn't introduce undue burden. So how we plan and structured usability testing for this round, which the specific round, we first started with writing out a plan and kicking off recruitment. We worked with some wonderful clinic staff on the ground in Montana to help us recruit folks to do testing with. We also reached out to previous participants from our discovery interviews, so we had some nice continuity between learning from those folks and then getting to show them something. And then if you're interested more in how to do something like this yourself, we have some really great toolkits on the NWA site, as well as the Nava site that can help outline how to write a research plan, how to do some of the synthesis, et cetera, if you're interested in that. Next, we did usability testing with WIC clinic staff. I mentioned earlier that we are using a service design mindset as our approach for this project. And we wanted to make sure that even though staff isn't direct users of the screener, they understood what those applicants would be seeing. And then they also, having done that customer service in person, can offer a lot of insightful and great feedback based on all their experience. And then we also use those sessions together to get feedback on the CSV prototype that we're going to show you a little bit later. And then the last kind of phase of this usability testing was usability testing with participants or applicants who would be using the eligibility screener as direct users. We followed an explicit interview guide. Those sessions lasted about 45 minutes. And in those sessions, we explored the happy path through the screener, as well as kind of hitting some of those side use cases. For example, there's like an extended income section where you kind of self-screen if you are eligible based on what the income limits are for a household. And then we collected and synthesized all of those findings into a report. So that's kind of the structure there. And we had a few goals that we wanted to achieve in our usability testing of the screener, especially talking to applicants or participants. First, we wanted to validate the prototype's high fidelity design. So we did use the US Web Design System, as I mentioned earlier. It has a lot of solid components that are already accessible. So they've been tested for accessibility, available for public use. But we also wanted to validate that the way we put them together works for folks. We also wanted to validate changes to the copy and content. We've been continuously working on the content for a few months and had concept tested the content, but every little change that we make has an impact, especially when you're trying to keep things concise. There's not a ton of content here, so it does have an effect. We also wanted to understand users' expectations around timing and next steps. In the confirmation, there's a few lines in there that set expectations that you may hear within 20 days. That is what the policy is, but 20 days feels like a lot, so we wanted to understand how folks felt about that, as an example. And then we also wanted to test the output that we got from varied user input, so that folks, so what we did is we had folks use their real life scenarios, fill this, quote unquote, fill this out, since they're just not actually filling it out with their real data. But we were able to help collect their real life scenarios and then see in a naive way, okay, what kind of record would that produce in our sample CSV? And so this, oh, sorry, my slide hadn't changed yet, and now it has. So we have insights here from usability testing with participants, and just noting here that this is the first time that participants in our testing saw some sort of product at all. When we did interview folks in discovery, we didn't show them any solutions. We didn't try to get their feedback on anything that we were showing. It was really just learning from their experience to inform what we would end up prototyping. So from our conversations, what did we learn? Generally, users found the screener easy to use and appreciated it was a fast experience. Many folks cited it was helpful to understand the process up front and then have the option to dive deeper on some trickier questions, like understanding what a household is. And then we had got some other really positive comments around the mobile friendliness of the form, the ability to review your information before you submit it, and then the clarity of the content. We got multiple comments around how much faster this experience was than having to call or wait on hold, which is what the current experience is. Our users also surfaced opportunities to build out more supportive and actionable content that would help improve the overall experience for them. So almost every tester reflected back that they wanted the ability to choose an appointment time for staff to call them back at, which was not a part of our scope originally, but good to know. This was an expected next step for many of our testers, especially because we have a part in the prototype where they select a clinic to have their appointment at. So they were expecting that. Even windows or general days to call would be preferred. Some folks suggested that they may leave that type of information in an open response text input that we have at the end of the form. And then users also surfaced that there was a lot of information on that self-screen income page. There's some content there around automatic eligibility and other benefit programs, and that just didn't seem as important as seeing the actual income limits up front. The last step is to wait for a phone call. Users wanted clear next steps on what they could do while they waited instead of just leaving the experience ambiguously. Users understood that they would wait for a call from staff next, but just really wanted something to do in the meantime. And many folks brought up just knowing, hey, what documents should I prepare? And that aligns with our discovery findings as well as some staff processes as well. They did point out that 20 days was a long time. So again, having something to do in that time is super helpful. It helps them feel like they're making progress. And then testers also pointed out that this could be an opportunity to share next steps via email, next steps like document preparedness, and as well as getting a confirmation mechanism there. And then lastly, users were interested in more information about upcoming WIC benefits, but then also in opportunities across other programs like SNAP and Medicaid. These other programs are mentioned in the form, but not every tester was familiar with them. And so they wanted more information to see if they could apply for these programs as well. And there's a lot of opportunity for the program to think about how they support an integrated benefit model, even at small scale, which could just look like cross-linking to content or other applications. All right, and so that was a lot of learnings, but how do they actually impact what we're building? So first, tactically, we've identified ways to refine the content to ensure the clarity of process and policy. You can see some examples of this on the right of this slide. And then we can also help better set the correct expectations with users about what happens next. Again, more content, room for us to refine. And then we also collected more user feedback on just other ways we can improve the experience, more future content improvements, maybe stuff we're not ready for yet, but is good to put in our backlog, and future features, something like appointment scheduling or document upload and readiness. It's good to know that those are things that users are interested in, as well as staff. And surfacing those things can help our stakeholders consider prioritizing certain features in the future. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about testing a mock API and what integration looks like in this kind of prototyped state. So as we exited our discovery phase, we defined our MVP as using a CSV or an Excel file to deliver the screener data to staff. And this approach and assumption was driven by our past experience, having done this with other government partners, and then also looking at what we estimated the level of effort to be here. So we met with staff at 2 different WIC clinics to understand details around what information would a CSV need to provide so that staff finds it useful? What is the ideal process around delivering the CSV to staff? And what's the minimum required information staff need to understand the eligibility of an applicant? And what about for a record in MSpirit? And then how does staff manage data integrity now? And so this is kind of tying the pieces of the screener that we ask into something that staff would see. In this process of requirements gathering, we also met with a technical subject matter expert from Montana to understand details from the above, from like the technical spirit side, as well as how we might technically deliver that CSV to staff. So in our conversations, we learned a whole lot. It was actually super enlightening, but distilled down here are a few of our key insights. So first, it's actually beneficial to have a staff intervention between a user submitting the screener and then entering that information into MSpirit in our MVP process. So right now, staff really cares about maintaining Spirit as a source of truth for valid WIC records. It's hard to track incomplete records, and we also didn't want to create more work for staff inside Spirit when we're not sure if that applicant actually is eligible for WIC. Integration can present more issues to work through, especially around data integrity and the mental model between an authorized representative and the WIC applicant. So staff helped us understand how vital some fields like date of birth are to creating an accurate record for a WIC beneficiary inside MSpirit. But we hadn't designed the screener around collecting too much personally identifiable information. And date of birth is not something that you'd want to create placeholder data for inside MSpirit. So this has really shifted how we think about the person who might be filling the screener out. Oftentimes, it's an authorized, it is what Spirit calls an authorized representative versus the applicant themselves. So somebody might be applying on behalf of their child or a foster child or different cases like that. So the you that we refer to in our screener may be different than the you that Spirit recognizes. So there's some work that we have to do there to bridge the two. And then there are a number of content changes that we can make, again, to increase clarity and comprehension of process and policy. And this is the same thing that I just said about participants. There's a lot of meeting in the middle between, what staff is saying is policy versus what is understandable language. We have to do some translation there. It's subtle, but it takes a lot of work to strike the balance right. Now I'm going to pass it over to LP to talk a little bit more about how we prototyped the API.
Thank you, Daniela. So as I mentioned in the intro, one of the goals of this demo project is to prototype an API integration with a management information system, Montana's being MSpirit. And this means prototyping how data is transferred from the screener to WIC staff without building that specific API technology in the MIS system. And the current state of this data transfer is actually WIC staff talking with potentially eligible WIC participants on the phone or in person. So this data transfer is instantaneous kind of between talking with this person and entering, after they talk with that person, understanding if they might be eligible, then entering that data into Spirit. We looked into several options during the discovery period that I'll expand, and the delivery period that I'll expand more on in the next few slides. As Daniela mentioned, our first option was to send the data as a CSV report, like an Excel report via email to staff. But we thought ahead to the possible future where, though, when this screener would contain personally identifiable information. And when we were thinking about that, we asked how Montana sends data securely among clinics today. And we learned from staff and Montana's technical subject matter expert that they use a Salesforce-owned business and intelligence and data visualization software called Tableau for similar purposes today. So we investigated that as a way to send the screener output to staff and validate that maybe this would be an option to pursue instead of the CSV. And then finally, we wanted to get as close as possible to an integration with the MIS system. So we looked into an option an automated process that would directly insert the data into Spirit as well. So on this next slide, let's look into these options in a bit more detail and talk through the considerations we made as we finalized our minimum viable product scope for the demo project. Option 1 on the right-hand side, this one is that CSV option. This mock API creates the CSV, emails it to staff. Staff reviews the CSV in Excel, contacts the participant, and enters data into Spirit. And option 2, the Tableau option, the mock API creates a CSV, imports it into Tableau. Staff logs into Tableau and reviews the report, contacts the participant, and enters data into Spirit. And then option 3, the mock API creates a CSV, PowerShell scripts and stored procedures, import that data directly into Spirit. Staff can view the participant directly in Spirit, contacts the participant, and updates that data in Spirit. So three different options. And for each of these options, we considered a variety of questions. For example, how does this option fit within existing WIC staff workflows? What is the lift for staff to interact with this new process, and what would their experience of that process be? How well does each of these options match WIC staff mental models and business process for using Spirit? As Daniela mentioned, the current one we learned through usability testing and research was you enter data into Spirit when you are certain that this WIC participant is eligible. We talked about what are the security and PII constraints, personally identifiable information constraints. And as I previously mentioned, this Tableau option came out from a desire to ensure data was transferred securely. But as this is a demonstration project, we learned, we would be using fake data or synthetic data, not real participant data. So that PII constraint may not be applicable to this particular project at this time. It would be applicable, of course, if this was brought to production in Montana. Another consideration was, if we built this option, would this be scalable beyond Montana? Would other states be able to adopt this process? And we weren't sure if every state would see themselves in that Tableau option, for instance. And finally, we assessed technical level of effort. How much effort would this be to achieve the required demonstration project outcome? So ultimately, Montana and the project team decided that for the purposes of this demonstration project, we can go with the CSV MVP as we had suspected coming out of the discovery period. But we've learned a lot by investigating these various options and these various ways to prototype an API. The final kind of decision points that helped us make this decision were email and using Excel is a known process for staff. staff really want to establish contact with a prospective participant before the data gets entered into Spirit, we won't be using PII during this demonstration project, so it's okay to email. Email is lower technical effort while still achieving what we need to accomplish for the QA and demonstration purposes. It's possible that other states could build off of just an email CSV type option in the future as well. So on the next slide, you can see our finalized product vision. First established from discovery and confirmed through delivery. Our minimum viable product is to build this eligibility screener and mock API, have the mock API receive screener data, produce a CSV with applicant data that WIC staff could use to enter into their Spirit system and take next steps. And though this is still manual data entry, it allows us to more specifically measure the burden of inputting data into Spirit that would be eliminated if there were an API governed by an API standard that could do it instead. So our next step from this is to conduct quality assurance testing. Perfect. And this is end-to-end testing of the product and process to ensure it works and we have a successful outcome. We will be doing QA testing with Montana, WIC clinic staff across 2 clinics using dummy data in that CSV file, and we'll collect metrics to measure the burden reduction, accomplishing that second demo project goal. And on the next slide, you can see the metrics in more greater detail. We'll be measuring how long it takes users to enter data from the screener output CSV into the MIS system, and we'll be comparing staff and participant perceptions of burden of their current process against the potential new process that incorporates an eligibility screener and data transfer. And now I'd like to pass it back to Daniela to share our learnings from delivery so far.
Yeah, thanks, LP. So one of our big learnings from all of this research and work has just been learning about how this gets us closer to an API standard. So first, focus on operational business processes. We learned that it's really important to, right now, WIC business processes in Montana to ensure a record is valid through talking with somebody on the phone before entering that into MSpirit. So an API standard still helps here, even if we do introduce a moment of pause. One way we could potentially explore this is to still have staff eyes on the screener output to ensure that record is valid and that they call them, validate that. But instead of having to manually enter that data, maybe there's a piece of tech that allows them to quickly initiate a Spirit record from that data instead of having to enter it themselves. API still supports that data transfer. Around Spirit integration, we learned that right now integration is somewhat happening using PowerShell scripts and stored procedures. That's the best option available, but it is fragile and requires IT support. An API standard that defines regular and expected endpoints would streamline and simplify inserting data into the MIS, and this could reduce the amount of manual support needed for that kind of data transfer. And in Montana, we learned a lot about Tableau, but just also generally how WIC leverages supporting third-party products. An API standard, again, one that defines regular and expected endpoints, would allow software to connect to Tableau or any other third-party product to the MIS using their respective APIs. Zooming a little bit out from the API standard learning specifically, what else have we learned? Ultimately, users appreciated the eligibility screener experience. It gave them more agency than a phone call and presents an opportunity for them to dive deeper, learn more, and prepare. There's a lot of nuance between business processes, data integrity, and how smart an API can be that has impacted our thinking about the MVP and then also got the wheels turning for future work. We're learning more about the data needed to comprise an accurate record and the record creation process in MSpirit, and that gets us closer to a better integration with Spirit for staff. And then all of our conversations have really helped us refine our points of view on a screener versus an application and how that impacts how we'd integrate with an MIS. All right, so what's coming up next for the demo project and WIC at Nava? So a few tangible next steps for us. I showed that timeline earlier, and then we mentioned this during the presentation, but our next big focus is quality assurance testing to measure impact. The rest of our project, we're really going to be focused on publishing the case study with learnings and recommendations, and then defining how Montana and the WIC community could bring the screener to production in their states. That will be part of what we publish with the case study as well. And then we have one final public demo day. I'm kind of shocked, but time has flown by so fast. But on November 3rd, we will present out the demo project outcomes. We'll be publishing our full case study around the same time. And so this presentation will really cover what's in there. Okay, and thank you so much. And then we have time for questions. So if you have any questions, please use that Q&A feature. And I already see one from Anna. Are the two clinics testing this form at varied locations, example, rural versus urban? And the answer is yes. One is a more urban clinic and the other one is a more rural one. And the rural one actually has staff that travel to different kind of like satellite agencies, clinics, agencies.
Great. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A as well. Or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask out loud. Let's see, one new message. Thanks so much for sharing. You're welcome. And just to highlight, if you haven't seen in the chat, LP has put some of the toolkits that are available through Nava and the National WIC Association in the chat that folks can reference for user research, for usability testing, and some of the things we talked about today. All right, we have a comment from Kevin in Montana, who is our partner in Montana. Montana has been super excited to participate in this project with Nava. Big questions remain, but so much learned to date. I think that sums it up, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. It's been great to work with you and the team, and let's bring it home.
Yeah. All right, we'll wait another minute, and if we don't have any more questions, we will wrap up. And if you have any more, oh, good, another question. Very good. Do you envision other organizations using an API to refer clients to the WIC agency, like community info exchanges, info and referrals for profits?
Yeah, I mean, I think not just the API, but actually specifically the screener itself. We imagined one of the potential scenarios that someone would use the screener is, you know, like maybe in a community health center, which is centered around more than just WIC. Somebody has like a tablet, and that can be a way that you just have somebody quickly go through the screener and get their name in as an applicant. So that's like very specifically the screener itself, using it as a referral tool between different partners and WIC itself. But then also the API could enable like other ideas like that being able to integrate with WIC systems. So the eligibility screener is one example of an idea, but potentially there's something else out there that folks would want to build off of or leverage in order to promote more folks getting onto WIC.
Yeah. Great. It looks like we have another question about costs of implementing the screener in another state. We can follow up after about that. and learn more about the scenario in the particular state, because usually it depends. Nava is not we do not sell a product. We help states. We do digital services. We provide services to help states set these kinds of things up, to build the software and run it. But we don't have like a set cost for a product. Like, this is how much this costs to do this. So it really depends on the work that would need to be done to set it up, which, depending on the resources within the state, or the resources that would need to be used external to the state with Nava or with others. It all depends. So we should have a follow-up conversation to learn more about your particular scenario, so that we can give you a more accurate answer. All right, we'll we'll wait another minute and see if any other questions stream in. And then also, I just thought, related to the last question, the screener tool that we are developing is open source. It is an open source tool. It's we've created this in partnership with Montana through philanthropic funding. So I'll also highlight that as well. Oh, good question. Other languages besides English. Has this come up in Montana? Oh, I think whoever's trying to answer is on mute.
It has. So we prioritize English just because that, according to the demographic data, most people speak English. But something that we have been working on is just thinking about internationalization of our product. And we have a front-end engineer who has been working on that as part of setting up all of the different components. But we have not done a translation, but that has been something that we thought about intentionally as we've been designing and developing the product.
So to summarize, Daniela, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have set it up in a way that translation can happen, but you haven't done it yet in this particular product.
I'm definitely going to butcher this answer, but there's something about one of the libraries that we have used to build out the screener. And when I say library, I think it's a JavaScript library that enables us to do translation. It's not as perfect as like a fluent person translating it, but it's a good start. LP is nodding, so I think I got the answer right.
All right, we'll see if any other questions stream in. We'll wait another moment.
Okay, I got it slightly wrong. So we don't have automated translations, but we can support translations.
Great. Thank you, Daniela. All right, well, with that, let's go ahead and wrap up the session. And if you have any further questions about this project, this work, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or to the National WIC Association. We will, as Danielle and LP shared, we will continue to share out resources and learnings on this project with the final demo day scheduled for November, and we will be publishing a case study report on the project as well. And then we are also happy to have individual conversations around how to scale this project to other states as well. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.